I'm going to be on the flip side of that argument. The first problem is that European politicians don't see Japan as a problem. They see Japan as a solution. They think, hey, Japan has low unemployment. Yeah, it has stagnation and high debt, but the government spending is enormous, and we love enormous government spending, and we love enormous conglomerates with no growth that are close to the government. So let's go for it. I think that the value trap problem in the European Union, indices, is in the very large caps. So I would agree with you. You have to be a very good stock picker, because you have to look, sort of below the mega caps. Now, the problem that I see is double. The mega caps have underperformed dramatically, and the banks, of course, and deservedly. Earnings growth is inexistent, earnings downgrades continue, and valuations are, let's say, optimistic based on all the earnings that they've bought in emerging markets at premium multiples. However, the problem that I find is that the good companies, the companies that are actually in the club that you mentioned, they've done phenomenally. They've actually done better than the US ones, and they are actually trading at higher multiples than the US ones. So the issue that I have is, if I have to look at value in Europe today, most of what I am going to be looking at are the value traps, the telecoms, the conglomerates, the utilities, the banks, and that's a dangerous one to look at.
Let me start with Daniel and Chris to come in here. What about the very basic point that these are companies in Europe rather than European companies, and i.e. A company in Europe that is doing the same as a company in the US is being valued as a European company as opposed to a US company. Do you see what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
I.e. they're on international markets, they're doing exactly the same things, but they are being classed because of their home-based jurisdiction. Is that not an opportunity?
No, I would disagree. And the reason why is because all CEOs all over the world deny the headquarter effect, but it exists. It's called cost of capital. And there's a second one, is the lack of identification between minority shareholder and management. Managements in the US buy back stocks, own a lot of stock. They actually care about the minority shareholder. Managers in Europe, basically, as a good investor friend of mine tends to say, are VIP employees.
Chris, do you want to come in on that point?
So I would say two quick things. The first would be, actually, when you scrape away the valuations, I would agree, there is a discount. Dan was absolutely right. There's a top tier of European companies, very global companies, where valuations aren't dissimilar from those in the States. But when you scrape below that surface, particularly the slightly more cyclical companies, because Europe's been slower growth, there is a discount. Second is, I think we're coming up to some critical moves now. Daniel correctly mentioned Japan and the mess that there's been there. The European Central Bank is trying to break that sort of setup with its policy over the next year, with stopping QE, and ultimately it will raise interest rates. Now, it's clearly still a very, very loose policy, clearly very stimulatory in nature, but ultimately I think that's what they've learned from Japan. You can't have mega permanent stimulus. If you do, that isn't a future. Yeah, particularly when you've got a declining population.
Governments are not letting that happen. Look at Spain, look at Italy, all of the governments that are in Portugal as well. Governments are pushing for higher fiscal imbalances in order to present themselves as too big to fail, so that the ECB does not stop the policy. And that is a very dangerous path, which is not dissimilar to what the Keiretsus did in Japan. The mega conglomerates actually forced the government to overspend, because they were actually going virtually bankrupt because they overspent themselves. So, I understand your half full glass situation. I think that my problem is that when I look at Europe and I look sector by sector, the companies are not more significantly cheaper than the US one. Only the technology giants, and there's a reason for it. Obviously, Facebook, Google are not the same as an index, the Stock 600, that has less than 7% technology. But in oil, pretty much the same multiples. In telecoms, in telecom and communication, not information technology, pretty much the same multiples. In consumer, pretty much the same multiples. We're not seeing dramatic differences, whilst the identification between minority shareholder and management, to me, is actually quite important.